This is Rock and Roll English. Real people, real English. Here's your host, Martin Johnston.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Rock and Roll English. Episode number 325, baby. Oh yeah. In today's episode we speak to Alistair from English Learning for Curious Minds. Alistair has been on the podcast before. He rocked it once and he rocks it again today as we talk about some vocab and share some stories. Very similar to the podcast I did with Keith a few weeks back, months back, I can't really remember. I got some good feedback for that podcast, so I thought, why not do that again? So here is the episode, longer than usual, 29 minutes of conversation. Yes, the transcript was tough, but this is my present to you. Remember, if you have any difficulty with the podcast in understanding, check out my course, Jungle Listening, which will transform the jungle fast-spoken English into something simple and learnable. Just click the link in the podcast you are listening to right now and check it out. Anyway, here is the conversation. I will talk to you all again at the end. Happy listening. So, Alistair, hello and welcome back to Rock and Roll English.
Hello, Martin. It is wonderful to be here.
Wonderful to have you. This is the second time you've been on the podcast, isn't it?
Yes, I believe it is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how could you forget such a great experience of the first time, hey?
It was wonderful, and I've been waking up every morning thinking, I hope he invites me back one day, so I'm very happy to be here.
I can only imagine. So I'm sure of all the 320-something episodes I've done, I'm sure your one is everyone's number one episode. But for maybe new listeners that haven't listened, just tell us something about you, what you do. It's English for Curious Minds, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got a podcast called English Learning for Curious Minds.
Okay.
That I started at the end of 2019. So it's 4 and a bit years. And the idea is it's a podcast that allows intermediate to advanced English learners to learn English while learning something interesting about the world.
Absolutely fantastic. And you also have quite an interesting story because obviously you're from the UK. Where in particular are you from?
It's a good question that there should be a simple answer to, okay. But kind of all over the place. I grew up for a bit in the south of England, then lived by Edinburgh, but I've actually spent most of my life in London. Strangely enough, it's where I went to university and then stayed for quite a long time. I'd never lived anywhere more than I've lived in London. But I'm not a Londoner.
The classic. And I think certainly when I talk to foreigners, the only foreigners I ever talk to really are Italians. When you talk about the UK, England, for them it's just London. They don't... Even my wife's family, they still say when we go there, they say, yeah, they live in London. And we say, no, we don't live in London. We live not far from London, but we don't live in London. But for them, it's just like you live in the UK. You could live in Manchester, and then people would say, yeah, they live in London. Exactly. But you actually live in Malta at the moment, yeah?
I do, yes. Not far from where you lived before in Sicily.
Yeah, in fact, I often wanted to go to Malta, but I never actually got round to doing it. I'm quite fascinated by Malta, actually, because... So what is the official language? It's English and Maltese, is that correct?
Correct, yeah, there are two official languages, English and Maltese.
Right. Yeah, because I remember, lots of Italians saying, I'm going to Malta to learn English, and I was thinking, to learn English, to go into Malta? But really, what that involved... Generally, these were obviously like teenagers. They were going on like a study holiday thing, and basically just involved them spending a couple of weeks away from their parents, getting as drunk as possible and doing anything but learning English.
Yeah, I think there are certainly people who fit into that category. And I can certainly understand, because if I was a 16-year-old and I was trying to persuade my parents to send me somewhere fun for the summer, I would definitely tell them that I wanted to go and learn English in Malta, because that would be a very fun thing to do as a 16-year-old. It'd be much more fun than going to Dundee or somewhere like that, and probably also cheaper. So I'm not surprised that it is such a popular destination for people like that.
Yeah. When you think of it, when people go to like, places, I've heard lots of random places in England people go to, and you think, well, if you go to Malta, but also, is it right? You're moving to Sweden, is that right?
Yes, correct. I'm moving to Sweden in a couple of months.
Cool. That's going to be quite a change. Are you ready for this change?
No, I'm not ready for it. No, I'm not really sure what to expect. I've also never actually been to Sweden before.
Okay.
So
wow.
That will be a bit of a change up. But I'd never actually been to Malta before I came here either. So
okay.
If that worked out, okay, that was 7 years ago. So we will see. We'll see if I can. We'll see if it works quite the same going to Sweden.
Right. Yeah. Well, if it makes you feel any better, I wasn't ready to move back to the UK, and even now I still think, what was I doing? And I'm still not ready to live here. But you just go with the flow.
Indeed.
And you'll be fine. So that term I just used, go with the flow, quite an idiomatic expression. And that's what we're doing today. So I have got some idiomatic expressions. And the way this is going to work is, so I will tell you the idiomatic expression and I will ask you for a definition. Now, this can be a really rough, terrible definition because we are not dictionaries. We don't have just this perfect dictionary knowledge. So it'll just to give people some understanding. And then I have a chat GPT definition, which we'll look at for a bit of a tighter one, and then both share some kind of story, anecdote related to this idiomatic expression. Okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, perfect. So let's start with the first one, up to scratch. What's your definition of that, Alistair?
I would say that up to scratch means meeting the expected standard level of something.
For a minute, I thought you were literally reading that from Chat GPT. Your mind must think the same way. You are Chat GPT. So Chat GPT is an actual person, and it's Alistair, because you got two keywords there. So the Chat GPT definition is meeting the required standard or expectation. That's the definition, pretty much what you said. If something or someone is up to scratch, it means they meet the necessary criteria or are of satisfactory quality. So I would say your definition was pretty good there. So tell us something connected to your life where this term comes to mind.
Well, I was actually thinking a bit more about what you mentioned earlier, moving to Sweden and trying to make sure that I'm prepared mentally and physically and linguistically as well. Because I was lucky to move to Malta and not really have to learn any new language because English is an official language. However, Sweden, even though Swedish people speak very good English, is not quite the same. And I've really been trying to do as much as possible to get my Swedish up to scratch before arriving there. So that includes listening to lots of podcasts, trying to read some books, even getting stuck into some Swedish grammar, which is quite fun. Anyway, I'm trying to do as much as possible to get my Swedish up to scratch.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I think it is actually used a lot with languages, this expression. But on that subject, a close friend of mine and regular guest on the podcast, Boom Boom Cannon, we call him, lives in Sweden, and it took him a long time to get his Swedish up to scratch. He said, I suffered this in Italy as well, I must admit. The problem is it was worse there in some ways because everyone speaks English so well. So he said he was going into shops and trying to talk to people in his broken Swedish, and they would immediately switch. So yeah, he was talking to them in broken Swedish and they would immediately switch to English, and just made him, he said it was very difficult to get through it. And like I said, I suffered that. And I actually think that is actually a really rude thing to do. If anyone talks to me in English, let's say in Italian, maybe they've got a very low English level, I don't switch to English because I just think it's just a direct message to that person of your language skills are terrible. Yeah. So it's just such a harsh, horrible thing to do. What do you think?
I agree, and I'm exactly the same as you. That sometimes if I'm in Italy speaking Italian, and occasionally people will say something in English, and I will just continue in Italian because I don't like people doing that. I think it's not a fair thing to do, especially if someone's clearly trying to improve. I think it's a bit different if someone is clearly struggling at a very low level, but which I will probably be in Sweden. But I think it's very different if someone is at a higher level and wanting to speak that language.
Yeah. If it's a situation where it's like if someone there's like a message that needs to be communicated and they're trying to talk to me maybe in broken English, I will say, do you want to speak Italian? Because I can speak Italian. Like I can help you basically. But if it's just someone like maybe a friend of like, I don't know, my wife who just wants to try and practice English, I would never then just shut them down and be like, no, I'm not going to even try to speak to you in English because your English is terrible. I just think it's such a horrible thing to do.
I do. I do too.
But yeah. So for me, this one's actually quite close to home. So when I make podcasts, and sometimes I'm listening to it, maybe editing the podcast, I always worry if the podcast is up to scratch. And I think, I don't think I have actually ever done it, but I often think, I'm just very critical of myself. I think we all are. And I think, like this podcast is terrible. Shall I just like bin it and try to make a new one? Because I'm thinking this isn't up to scratch. Last week's episode was so much better, for example, and it's just a constant fight I have with myself. Have you ever experienced this you're in the podcast game as well?
Every day.
Okay. So it's good to know I'm not the only one. Okay, so the next on the list is throw caution to the wind. Okay, what does that mean?
I'm probably going to come up with a bad definition here, but it probably means something like to do something a little bit risky without fully considering the consequences.
Yeah, I would say you've definitely got the keyword of the definition in there. Not bad. So Mr. Chat says to act without considering the potential risks or consequences, to take a bold and unrestrained approach, often involving risk or uncertainty. So I think the first part of that is the clearest, to act without considering the potential risks or consequences. So give us an example of a time that you have thrown caution to the wind.
I think people will probably see a theme with everything I'm putting in here, but I was going to say that moving to Sweden in a few months, and I have never been there, but I did exactly the same thing when moving to Malta. So I thought I kind of threw caution to the wind when it came to just packing up and moving to a completely different country that I'd never been to, and I'm going to repeat that. And hope that it doesn't end in tragedy.
And I'm right in thinking you have one child or two children?
Two. One when we first spoke, and another one arrived after that.
Okay, so a very similar situation to me then. We moved back to the UK with one child, and it definitely was a lot more difficult than when I moved to Italy by myself with a backpack. Moving from Italy here, of literally we actually hired a van to like drive here, and my god, that's, to be honest, even though I sometimes think maybe I should move back to Italy, the thing I think that's stopping me is just the hassle of doing it again. I'll prefer to be miserable for the rest of my life and die in England than go through that again.
Packing your life up into boxes and dealing with relocation companies is it's not fun.
I've been there, and my example was pretty much exactly the same things that we mentioned. Moving back to the UK, now I knew like financially it was going to be difficult, but we just threw caution to the wind and didn't really consider the consequences and said like, sod it, let's just do this. And yeah, there have been certainly times where thinking maybe it wasn't such a good idea to throw caution to the wind like we did. But I think we're sort of coming out of it now, sort of 2 years later. And another example I have of this, again, related to what we spoke about, is having a second child. Because we did sort of think, it's quite tough with one. Are we going to be okay? And it was just like, well, let's throw caution to the wind and let's go for it. Not really think about it, just do it. And again, certainly times there thinking, was that a good idea? So your children must have a similar age gap. What's the age gap between yours?
One is about to be 1 and the other is 4.
Okay, so a little bit better. So yeah, ours are about to be 3 and 1, exactly 2 years between them.
Okay.
Which the main difficulty of this is the older one, if you leave them alone for a little bit, will be playing with her younger brother, but generally playing might be sort of like putting a pillow over his face so he can't breathe.
Okay,
So yeah, have you experienced any of this?
Not yet. No, the older one is quite sweet with the younger one, but
Okay.
but there probably will be a day when I come back and there is a pillow and jumping up and down on him or something like that. The young one is just at the stage where everything his big brother does is just the best thing in the world. So even if he's jumping up and down on the bed, he's kind of laughing and
Right.
So he'd probably embrace being suffocated by a pillow.
Yeah, because you think, I'll just go to the toilet, they'll be okay just for like 1 minute, and then you come back and then the older one's like lying on top of the younger one, and you're thinking, yeah,
Oops.
maybe it's not a good idea. I'll just bring them both to the toilet with me next time. The next one, to fall by the wayside. What does that mean?
So I would guess the definition of that would be something like to stop doing something that you used to do, or to stop focusing on something so that it becomes worse.
Yeah, I would say your definition is actually better than ChatGPT's this time. I must admit, the standard of ChatGPT's definitions has definitely gone down. It says here, to fail or decline, to be abandoned or neglected. I'm not so sure about that. It says if someone falls by the wayside, they are unable to keep up or succeed and are left behind or forgotten. But I much prefer your example, like you're not able to maintain something that you were doing. So, for example, an example where you or someone fell by the wayside.
So I studied languages when I was at university, and also spent quite a lot of time living in China. And I really enjoyed learning Mandarin. I absolutely loved the difficulty of it. I think some of the things that put people off, like learning characters and tones and stuff like that, I thought they were one of the most enjoyable things, just because they were so foreign compared to English. And as I started to get more and more into Mandarin, I found that the languages I was meant to be studying, in fact, French and Italian, completely fell by the wayside, because I was just far interested in other things. And one of the things that I kind of took from that experience was how much easier it is to learn when you're actually really interested in something, when you're kind of telling yourself little stories about why something is interesting. And there's still, I don't know, like bizarre, like very unusual characters or words in Mandarin that I can remember now, and this is going back 15 years, because they're just like so imprinted in my memory. Whereas, the French, especially because my Italian is much better than my French, that has certainly fallen by the wayside because I have no day-to-day need for it, and I just focus on other things.
Yeah, this is what has always stopped me from learning another language. Well, I'm worried that my Italian will fall by the wayside, because if I start learning Spanish or something, and it took me so long to get to a decent level in Italian, I just think like, I don't know. And I think I certainly underestimated how difficult it is to get to a good standard in a language. I honestly remember when I was in Italy, and I think I'd been there less than a week, and I was talking to one of my friends at home who was the only one that had language learning experience, who, funnily enough, learned Mandarin actually. And I said, I'm just not getting anywhere with the language. And I remember he said, you've only been there 5 days. Like, what did you expect? And I think in my mind, I was thinking, well, a month, I'll be fluent. But I think just, I was going to say, it was just, I think our British mentality of like, everyone speaks English, like it must be really easy to learn English, so I'll go there and it'll be really easy for me to learn Italian. But obviously that's not the case at all.
Well, I think there's lots of people with we probably make lots of money selling dreams of getting fluent in a week or all those kind of things. There's one specifically for Italians that someone told me about the other day, which is, I think it's called like metodo bambino or something like that, like the kind of kids method. I probably got the name wrong, but I think that was that claimed to get you fluent in 8 days or something like that.
Ooh,
which
wow.
Clearly, well, I've got no idea if it works or not, but it seems that if it does work, it should be the most successful thing in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I would love to know the trick to become fluent in 8 days.
Yeah, I actually bought, before I went to Italy, because I was trying to get my Italian up to scratch, I bought a audio thing which you listen to it, and again the promise there was like fluent in a month or something. So I thought, well, I'll be fluent by the time I go there then, if I listen to this CD. And I remember actually thinking when I went there, yeah, I think I'll be okay here actually, because I knew about 10 words. And then very quickly you realise it was like a very, very hard punch in the face as soon as you get there and people start talking to you and you're like, what the hell
and you can't
are you saying?
You can't start a conversation by saying, look, these are my 10 words. I'd appreciate if you just keep the conversation with these 10 words.
Yeah, what a very early experience. So this is my first time I've moved to Italy. I'm on my own, and I was on the bus, and I had to basically ask someone where the bus stops. And I basically, so I'm not even in correct Italian, I basically said, where stops bus? And I managed to get that message across, and then she said a name which I recognised, and I thought, I've already had a conversation. Like I've only been here 10 minutes. Like I am absolutely smashing it. Like this is it. But yeah, that was like the best conversation I had in like the first 2 years probably when I was there. So.
Well, now you've got an Italian wife, so that things.
Yeah.
And you speak Italian with your wife.
Yeah, although I do sometimes worry that when I talk to my wife, that, sometimes like with children, that sometimes you understand what they say, your children, but other people don't. Okay. I do sometimes still worry that I've just sort of developed this like language with my wife that she understands me, but if I talk to someone else, I do seem to get sometimes a few more sort of strange looks, but maybe that's just in my head. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, when I go to Italy, we went there for Christmas. I talked to her family, everything, no problems. But yeah, obviously I'm still there short sometimes where they're still sometimes thinking, what the hell is he talking about? But I managed to get by. But for me, to fall by the wayside, one thing I must say here, for years, I thought this expression was to fall by the waist side. And I just always remember thinking, what is the waist side? To be honest, I don't even know why. You've got a podcast about curious minds. Do you know where that expression comes from?
I do not. I should have looked this up before.
So that's your homework, everyone, to look that up. Okay. So my story about this is when I went to university. So obviously before university, you go to school and you generally know everyone and you know who the intelligent people in the class are and maybe, let's say, some of the more challenged students. And I remember going to university and it's very much like, everything's bigger and things. And so you meet the people like in your dormitory and stuff. And then when I had my first lecture, I studied economics for some reason. And I went into this lecture and it was like, I mean, it was like I was going to a concert because it was enormous. And I remember looking around and it was absolutely full. I don't know the specific number, but for me, in my mind, it was like 10,000 people. I'm sure it wasn't that. I wasn't sure there weren't that many people. But then I remember, like, as we went through the year, not even to like the second and third year, sort of 6 months down the line, lots of people, I think, fell by the wayside and just gave up because it was like the whole university thing. I remember myself thinking, I'm not sure if I'm going to stick this out because it was all too much for me. How about you? Your experience at university, like those first like few weeks, or few months?
Lots of people fell by the wayside. And it's sort of like, I don't know, like some kind of movie. You're thinking, who's going to come in on Monday morning? Oh no, he's out.
He's gone. Yeah,
we've lost him. Soldier down.
Yeah, but like adapting to new life, how was that for you? To like, did you change city? Because that's the culture in the UK, isn't it? To like go to a new place.
Yeah, I mean, I went to university in London, and
of course, yeah.
London is clearly the biggest city in the country and has, I think, 10 or so universities. I mean, there are lots of different universities in London, so it doesn't really feel like a university city in the same way as smaller cities do that are dominated by students. I mean, I've been to London lots of times before, so it didn't feel quite so unfamiliar. Right. But still, the experience of going in and seeing huge lecture halls and that kind of stuff, it was really mind-boggling.
Yeah, no, exactly the same for me. So, okay, let's do the last one now, which is to bite off more than you can chew. What does that mean?
So I'm going to put on my ChatGPT hat. To bite off more than you can chew, I would imagine means working or trying to do more than you are able to, or you should be able to.
I actually, again, prefer yours. More simple words, much better than Mr. Chat, which is to take on a task or responsibility that is too difficult or demanding to attempt something that exceeds your abilities or capacity. So, yeah, basically trying to do too much in simple words. So, a time that you have bitten off more than you can chew?
I think every day I feel like I'm biting off more than I can chew. And I feel like I've got a bit better over the years in terms of planning my own life and kind of working commitments and so on. But I always find it a struggle if I'm trying to plan what I'm doing for the week. And I always find myself biting off more than I can chew. And at the end of the week thinking, I'm not going to do that next week. And lo and behold, exactly the same thing happens. I think I've got to, there are certain things I can do today. Thinking today I'm talking to Martin, I've got to do X, Y, and Z other things. And today is exactly the same as every other day in that I'm not going to manage to do everything that I want to do. Although I'm very happy that we've had this conversation. So I've not bitten off more than I can chew in that respect.
Yeah, no, I'm almost exactly the same as you. Almost every day. And I think even as I mentioned, moving back to the UK with a child, then having a second child, that alone was biting off more than I can chew. But then like working for myself as well in one of the most expensive countries, I think, in the world, I'm not sure. And just to add to like everything I've got going on, I've recently actually got a new job as a lecturer at a university in London.
Congratulations.
Thanks. And I don't know how I'm actually going to manage all of this. So by the time this podcast goes out, I hope to still be alive, actually, because I've got my rock and roll English stuff going on, 2 children, and what is essentially a full-time job. But luckily, it's lots of working from home. So I think I may have bitten off more than I can chew again. And literally in this exact moment, I'm looking at the clock thinking I need to go and pick up my daughter right now because like you, I'm trying to fit in too many things to my day, again biting off more than I can chew. So we are going to have to stop the podcast here, but it's been wonderful talking to you, Alistair. And just for people that don't know, where can they find out more about you?
Sure. So the best place to start, I guess, is the English Learning for Curious Minds podcast. So search on your podcast app or on YouTube, English Learning for Curious Minds. And you can find out more there.
Okay, excellent stuff. I'll put links to all of your stuff in the show notes anyway. Okay, so thanks a lot, Alistair, and we will see you soon.
Thanks so much, Martin. Bye.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, so that was me talking to Alistair from English Learning for Curious Minds. Remember to check him out. I actually find Alistair a really funny guy. I really like him. But anyway, let's have a quick look at the main pieces of vocabulary. So we had the term up to scratch. When something is up to scratch, it meets the required standard or expectation. So Alistair spoke about his Swedish not being up to scratch, and I spoke about how I always worry my podcasts are not up to scratch. Like I'm worried about this one. I'm always worried. Then we had throw caution to the wind, which is to act without considering like the potential risks or consequences. Again, Alistair spoke about him moving to Sweden, and I mentioned how Mrs. RnR and I threw caution to the wind when we moved back to the UK. Then we had to fall by the wayside. I don't know why we say this, but remember it means when you stop doing something, basically. I use the example of people at university. Lots of people fell by the wayside. They just stopped coming to university and then didn't come anymore. And last but not least, we had to bite off more than you can chew. So think of this in a literal way. If you bite an apple and you take a really big bite and it's too much to chew, that's a problem. So it's basically doing too much, which, as I mentioned, is kind of what I'm doing now, because I do have a new job as a lecturer at a university in London, a full-time job, and the RocknR English. And I'm not sure if I've actually told people this, but I'm also doing a master's degree, and I have 2 children. So I have definitely bit off more than I can chew, which is why I'm recording this podcast at 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday. Anyway, thanks a lot for listening, everyone. I will talk to you very soon, but in the meantime, just keep on rocking, baby.
Thanks so much for listening to RocknR English. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit rocknrollenglish.com and facebook.com/rocknrollenglish. We'll catch you next time.